Finally, let's talk about improving our perceptions of ourselves as well as our perceptions of others. So, one of the first steps in improving our self-perception is to avoid reliance on rigid schema. As we've said previously, we often rely on schemata to help us make sense of the world around us. But oftentimes, reliance on these schema can prompt mindless communication and can lead us to overlook new information that might need to be incorporated into those schema. So we need to be careful of how much we rely on these schemata. Next, we need to be critical of socializing forces. We've talked about how friends, family, sociocultural norms, and media are all powerful forces on our self-perception. But we need to make sure that those influences are having positive influences on our self-perception, because oftentimes these cultural socializing forces can lead to really distorted self-perceptions. In addition, we need to beware of self-fulfilling prophecies. A self-fulfilling prophecy is a thought and action pattern in which a person's false belief triggers a behavior that makes the initial false belief actually or seemingly true. So, for example, if a child does poorly on a math or a spelling test and they think to themselves, well, I'm just stupid and I don't know how to spell or I don't understand math, then that is going to lead to actions that reinforce that belief. They aren't going to study for their spelling quizzes or their math quizzes because they think to themselves, well, what's the point? I'm just going to do badly anyway, which then, of course, leads them to do badly on those quizzes. I tell the same thing to my public speaking students. Oftentimes when people go in for presentations, they think to themselves, well, I'm just going to bomb this. This is going to be the most atrocious speech ever, etc. And because they think that to themselves, they then don't put the research in, they don't practice the speech properly, and as a result, they end up doing really poorly on the speech. Whereas if they had thought to themselves, I'm going to do the best that I can on this, then you put the work in, right? You do the studying, you do the research, you practice, and then ultimately you end up doing better. So we need to be aware of these self-fulfilling prophecies and try not to get trapped in that cycle. In addition, we need to create and maintain supporting interpersonal relationships. It's so important for us to find interpersonal support because, as we've talked about, our relationships can have a really important influence on the way that we perceive ourselves. We also need to be aware of distorted patterns of thinking and acting. Because so often, like we were talking about with the self-fulfilling prophecy, we can get trapped in these cycles of thinking I'm not good enough, I'm not perfect, etc. And we need to be able to recognize and break those patterns so that we can hopefully see ourselves in much more positive lights. Now, in addition to improving our perceptions of ourselves, we can also improve our perceptions of others. One of the ways that we can do this is to develop empathetic listening skills. Effective listening isn't easy, and most of us don't really make an effort to overcome common barriers. One of these common barriers is thinking about how we're going to respond to something rather than thinking about what somebody is actually saying to us. But we need to focus more on listening to the other because that can help to expand our self and social awareness by learning from other people's experiences and taking on different perspectives. Another way that we can improve our perceptions of others is to beware of stereotypes and prejudice. Stereotypes are sets of beliefs that we develop about groups, which we then apply to individuals from that group. So they're basically schemata that have been taken too far. And stereotypes can be really harmful because they ignore the person's individuality and the diversity that is present within a larger group of people. So we tend to rely on these ideas, on these stereotypes, to try to better understand someone, but in doing so, we completely distort who they are. And we also need to be aware of prejudices, which are negative feelings or attitudes towards people based on their identity or identities. And these can have individual and widespread effects. So we just need to be aware of the stereotypes that we rely on and of our prejudices, and check them whenever we think that they might be influencing how we are perceiving others. In addition, it's important for us to engage in self-reflection. Oftentimes, a good way to improve our perceptions is to just be more reflective and recount our thoughts and our actions. We often become more aware of our self-concepts, or we can become more aware of how our self-concepts influence the way that we perceive others. We have to ask ourselves, is my impression of this person based on how they want to be or how I think that they should be? And this brings us to the idea of perception checking. Perception checking is a strategy that helps us to monitor our reactions to and our perceptions about people and communications. So we're just asking ourselves, what is influencing the perceptions that I'm making right now? And there are 3 steps when we are engaging in perception checking. First, we have to describe what happened. Then we have to offer up possible interpretations before finally verifying and clarifying with the individual. So the first thing that we do is describe what happened. So let's say that you were sleeping in bed with your partner and they got up and suddenly walked out the door and slammed the door in your face. When they come home later, you might approach them and ask, "Hey, I noticed that when you left this morning, you closed the door rather hard. And so I wanted to check in with you and make sure that everything was okay. Are you mad about something, or were you just in a rush?" And doing this perception checking allows for several different things. When we first heard the door slam, we might have jumped to the conclusion that our partner was mad about something. And if we then later confronted them and asked them simply what they were mad about, that might escalate a situation. But if we instead describe what happened objectively, "I noticed that you closed the door rather firmly this morning," and offer up possible interpretations, "Were you mad about something, or were you just in a hurry?" allows us to verify the actual motive behind the behavior and clarify what was actually going on. So we have to stop ourselves and make sure that we aren't jumping to those conclusions. And engaging in perception checking is one of those ways. So all of these tactics can be used in order to help us improve the perceptions that we are making about others in our lives.